Good evening and welcome. My name is Dr. Jennifer Joyce, and I serve as the Associate Director of the Center for Irish Studies at Villanova University. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's wonderful event, A New Chapter, Women Writing Northern Ireland Now. I'm delighted to see such an incredible turnout to support our exceptional panel of writers from Northern Ireland, award winners Michelle Gallen, Lucy Caldwell, and Jan Carson, along with our moderator, Irish writer Yvonne Cassidy. First, just a few logistics about tonight's show. After the readings and discussion, there will be a Q&A session, so we ask you to remain seated until its conclusion. The program, including Q&A, will run approximately 75 minutes. As you saw upon entering the theater, books from our featured authors are being sold in the lobby, and sales will resume after the program. Lastly, our gracious authors requested that they have a chance to meet and mingle with you and sign some books after the program. So they're inviting you to the lobby for light refreshments to have the chat with them after the Q&A. Villanova University's Irish history began in 1842, when it was founded by Irish Augustinians as a school for Irish immigrants. Since then, Villanova's connections to the Irish community in the United States and to the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland have grown deeper and stronger. The Villanova Center for Irish Studies, housed in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, is indebted to Dean Adele Lindenmeyer for her unwavering support. We have been a leader for 4 decades in interdisciplinary teaching and scholarship on Ireland in a global framework. We offer a major and a minor, and visiting scholars and writers from Ireland, including our Heimbold Chair of Irish Studies, keep alive our dialogue with the island of Ireland. We organize vibrant study abroad and internship opportunities at places like the Seamus Heaney Center at Queen's University in Belfast, the University of Galway, and the Abbey Theatre. Additionally, our center celebrates the rich culture and history of Ireland and its diaspora with a compelling lineup of programs each academic year, just like this one, bringing Irish theater, film, dance, history, literature, and more to Villanova's campus. As you might imagine, it took a village to put together this 5-city event. A new chapter began last night in New York City with Columbia and NYU, is in Philadelphia here tonight, tomorrow heads to Washington, D.C. at Georgetown, and wraps up with events in Boston and Syracuse later in the week. This ingenious event is supported by the Government of Ireland, the Northern Ireland Bureau, and the Consul General of Ireland in New York. I would also be remiss without mentioning the extensive behind-the-scenes work of Nick Quaife, Director of Cultural Affairs at the Consulate. The Villanova Center for Irish Studies is especially grateful to all of our local partners who helped us advertise for this event, including the following from Villanova: the incredible team at Falvey Memorial Library, the Augustine and Culture Seminar Program, the Department of English, the Department of History, the Department of Political Science, the Department of Global and Interdisciplinary Studies, Gender and Women's Studies, the Center for Peace and Justice Education, the Creative Writing Program, and the Villanova Writing Center. Our center also regularly collaborates on events with local Philadelphia and Delaware Valley Irish American groups and Irish Studies centers. And tonight we especially want to thank some key Irish Philadelphia partners for their help. In particular, Dr. Kirsty Powell from St. Joseph's University's Irish Studies program, Emily Norton Ashenhurst and Una McDade and the Irish Diaspora Center of Philadelphia, and Alana Barry McCloskey and the Irish American Business Chamber and Network. We would not be here tonight without the Villanova College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Communications Super Team, led by Rebecca Rabalski, the Mullen Center for the Performing Arts team, especially Tina, Andrea, and John, thank you, Kathy Welch and the Villanova Inn, Villanova Catering, and our Irish Studies team, especially our fearless director, Dr. Joseph Lennon, and our tireless administrative assistant, Kirsten Ludi. It is always a special experience and personally gratifying to me when we can champion women's voices. We would like to extend our gratitude for the partnership of the Anne Welsh McNulty Institute, our co-sponsors and leader in women's initiatives at Villanova. Director Terry Boyer believed in this vision and helped us make the Philadelphia location possible. Back in April, we held a wonderful event on campus to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Northern Ireland Good Friday Agreement, called Women as Peacemakers, where we collaborated with the McNulty Institute and the Irish American Business Chamber and Network. My esteemed colleague, Villanova Assistant Professor of Political Science, Dr. Sira Murta, helped to moderate that event. She and I are currently team teaching a course at Villanova called Narratives of Gender and Conflict, in which Northern Ireland serves as a critical case study in the study of gender, conflict, and peace. She and I share a love of literature and are excited for our students here tonight to hear more from our writers on how this intersection proves vital in the writing of Northern Irish women today. Also at our April event, I had the great privilege of meeting the Consul General of Ireland, Helena Nolan, and much to my delight, learned that we also share a love of literature, and in particular, Irish women writers. She mentioned that she'd like to bring some of my favorite Northern Irish women writers to the States, and of course I gushed at the idea. Tonight, that dream has come to fruition, and it is my great honor to now welcome to the stage the visionary for this event and author in her own right, the Consul General of Ireland in New York, Helena Nolan. And we just have a very small gift for you. We have some signed copies of books from our most recent women Heimbold writers for you. So welcome to Villanova.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Joyce, Jenny, for that lovely introduction and that surprise present. Who doesn't like getting surprise presents? That's a great start. Look, I'm not going to talk for very long because we want to hear from our incredible writers, but there are just a few things I'd like to say before the main programme starts. Firstly, I'm delighted to be back here again in Villanova and for the first time in this beautiful space. Dr. Joyce has referred to our rich history of Irish connection and partnership here, and also to our brilliant Irish community organisations that we work with and partner with. But why are we here tonight? And I don't mean to answer any existential questions. I know we have a philosopher in the audience, at least one anyhow. But why now? Why this event? And I think, as Dr. Joyce has said, this is the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. It's a very special year. We've been talking about the progress since that agreement and the journey that we still have to travel. And one of the ways we can look at it is through the prism of culture, of literature, of the lived experience of writers like our wonderful guests here this evening. And we also wanted to partner with our key universities and Irish studies programs, and we wanted this to be a regional tour drawing in a number of our consulates and a number of regions. So yesterday was New York, and today we're here, and the tour goes on, as you've heard. And this is all part of our Global Ireland programme, which is aimed at sharing Ireland's story with the world and hearing the stories of others and having that rich cultural dialogue and exchange and learning from one another and building empathy, which I think has never been more important. And it's about making new connections, and I think a lot of that has been happening already, and hopefully it'll continue tonight and throughout the tour. It's a really special time for Northern Irish writing and for brilliant women writers in particular. And now I have to look at these particular writers. And the words of David Bowie came to me this evening. I don't sing, don't worry, I never sing, I don't tell jokes, but the stars are out tonight, I think. We're very fortunate to have such amazing guests here this evening. Just very quickly, a few personal references to Michelle. When I was in my last job in Belgium, we had an embassy book club. It pivoted online, like we all did, during those times, and we read Big Girl, Small Town. And the way that Michelle wrote about Magella, her fearless honesty, her tenderness, we'd read nothing like it before, and it was, a lot of people said afterwards that book club really kept them going, and that book in particular was a wonderful read. Lucy, I think it was around 8 years ago, I was reading The Meeting Point. Again, I'd never read anything like it before from an Irish writer, and I happened to be in London with a friend, and Lucy walked into the bookshop that we were in. And I have to confess, we were too in awe to even approach her. So we just stood there and we kind of stalked her around the bookshop for a little bit. And then we asked the bookshop owner, is that really her? Anyhow, in the way things go, a couple of months ago, the same friend was visiting me in New York. We went to the Irish Arts Centre to Paul Muldoon's picnic, and there was Lucy, and we confessed our stalking. So it's wonderful to have her here this evening. And then Jan, I met Jan when she won the European Prize for Literature, and I got invited to Beaux-Arts in Brussels, which is built on the place where the Bronte sisters lived and taught when they were in Belgium. And I got to see and hear Jan for the first time. And she made an amazing acceptance speech. This was just after, or not long after, Brexit. And you could have heard a pin drop in that great hall as Jan talked about what it meant to be a woman, a writer, to be Irish, to be Northern Irish, and to be European. Ever since then, I've been trying to convince her to go into politics, but thankfully for the world of literature, she has resisted, but it's definitely politics loss. Anyway, Jan is a writer and so much more, and you'll hear more about that when she speaks in a minute. We've done a few projects together, always in conjunction with our great friends at the Northern Ireland Bureau, and we've done the same with this programme here, and thanks go out to Andrew Elliott for all of his consistent support. He said to me the other night, this is great bringing all these Northern Irish women writers, I think we should just keep on doing it, and I said absolutely, we will. This plan began about 2.5 years ago over lunch and a glass of wine in Belfast, and Jan was the original fire starter. She made it happen, and here we are. But all three of these writers are brilliant innovators, and I can't wait to hear them share their stories with you. We have another wonderful writer as our moderator, Yvonne Cassidy, a very fine Irish woman writer who I know for too many years to talk about, and she's got 3, 4, 5. I always add to the number of novels she has out, but she has lots of books and also does amazing philanthropic work and is a fantastic member of our Irish community in New York. So as Consul General of Ireland, I'm so very, very proud of all of these women and their work, and so proud that we can share them here with you this evening. We're really excited to hear from them. If you love the writers, remember, buy the books. They're just outside. I want to thank Villanova again, the Dean and all the team for their support, and special thanks to Nick Quaife, our culture attaché, who's come on this journey with me, literally, and is still standing just about, and to Ellen and to all our team in New York. Thanks to all of you for being here in such numbers on a cold and almost snowy night. And now over to our stars. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena, for those lovely introductions. And I am very grateful and honoured to be sharing the stage with these wonderful writers tonight. And so just to let you in on what the format of the evening is going to be, we decided that we would start off, they're each going to share with you a little bit of their wonderful novels. So I'm going to introduce each writer first, they're going to read, then we're going to have a conversation about some of those themes, and then we're going to open it up to some questions from the floor, and then we have the light refreshments afterwards. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next hour or so. So the first person I'm going to introduce is going to be Lucy. So glad it's nice and bright on stage. I forgot my glasses here, but there we go. Born in Belfast, Lucy Caldwell is the author of 4 novels, several stage plays and radio dramas, and 2 collections of short stories, with the 3rd forthcoming in 2024. Awards include the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature, the George Devine Award, the Dylan Thomas Prize, a major individual artist award from the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, the BBC National Short Story Award, and the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. Lucy was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 2018, and in 2022 was a recipient of an E.M. Forster Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And Lucy's going to read from her novel These Days. That's right.
Thank you. Yes, we're going to stand at the podium to read. We decided. Thank you so much, Dr. Joyce Jenny, for that really wonderful, warm welcome, and Helena as well for such a brilliant speech. It's wonderful to be here. I'm going to start by telling you a story that's not my story, but it's one of the stories that's affected me most in my life. In 2015, in the south of Ireland, there was an equal marriage referendum where people were voting for the right to marry the person they chose. And the way the narrative was playing out in the media is young people were coming in from all over the world. There was a sort of a thing, a hashtag, a return to vote. So anyone who was eligible to vote in this referendum was coming in from Australia, from London, from all over the world. And the way the media narrative was being played out is that young progressive people were going to vote yes, and older conservative religious people were going to vote no. And I was watching the TV when an elderly woman was vox popped walking into the voting station. She was very, very frail, very elderly. She was kind of bent over. She was being helped out of the car. And they put up the camera to her and they said, "So which way are you going to vote?" And she turned and she ignored the person asking the question, looked directly down the camera, and she said, "I'm going to vote yes. And I'm going to vote yes because my whole life I've never been able to live with the people that I want to live with. I've never been able to love the people that I want to love. My whole life has been a waste. No one else's life should be as wasted as mine. I'm voting yes." I can still feel the hairs on the back of my neck hearing her say that. And I started thinking, my whole life I've always written the stories of women and girls and sisters, and I started thinking of my own teenage years, my friends, and I started thinking, hang on, where are the stories of young women in love from Belfast, from my childhood? I couldn't think of any. I could think of some gay men, bisexual men, couldn't think of any women. I contacted a friend of mine, a mutual friend of Jan's as well, academic Dr. Caroline McGuinness, and I said to her, where are these stories that I'm missing in the Northern Irish canon? And she said, there just aren't any. I could not believe that. There just weren't. There may be one or two writers, there were a few self-published things, but in the main, there weren't any of these stories. So I wrote a story about two young women falling in love called Here We Are. That story was published in my first collection, Multitudes. And that story's been anthologized a lot of times, and so many people told me that that was the first time they'd seen themselves or a version of themselves or their friends, their sisters, in print in that way. And my favourite thing about that story is 8 years later, it's already far out of date. That's how rapidly Irish society and Irish literature is changing, that story, there's nothing remarkable about that story anymore. But when I was writing these days, following women across the city of Belfast during the Belfast Blitz, I was doing the research, looking at the old photographs, and I was trying to tell stories you might not expect. And I would see the photographs of the women, say, who suddenly had license to be in a public place and in a public role in the way that they were never allowed to before. And these women would be, say, driving ambulances or on the front line or, doing first aid, first responder type roles. And so I wrote one of them into my novel. And there's a young woman in my novel. My novel begins following two sisters. The younger sister is 19, she's very unhappy. She's volunteering for first aid. Her mother thinks that she shouldn't because she'll never meet a nice man that way. And her mother's right, she doesn't meet a nice man, she meets a nice woman, falls in love. This is a little bit of their story. The day was clouding over now. That old Belfast joke, you might not get 4 seasons in a year, but you do sometimes in a day. When it started to rain, they made for the Municipal Museum and Art Gallery. They wandered through the galleries of Mesolithic tools, the Bronze Age lunulas. Emma paused at a display case containing a gold-ribbon twerk, lightly twisted, tapering to fine hooks at each end. It was discovered, the plaque said, in a bog in Ballyrashane, County Londonderry, though of course, Sylvia pointed out, wouldn't have been Ballyrashane then, wouldn't have been Londonderry, wouldn't even have been Dura yet. Imagine, Emma thought, the smith heating up the gold to exactly the point before it began to melt, then taking it in tongs and twisting it delicately, rapidly, fashioning the ends, then curving it into a perfect neck-shaped circle before setting it aside to cool, buffing it with a piece of soft leather till the soot was gone and it shone, and then someone took it and eased its ends open and placed it round a woman's neck. Would it have meant love, she thought? Or a more formal sort of commitment, a betrothal or a marriage, a promise solemnified, made tangible, and in a public or private way, or both? And what became of her? and them, and what will become of us, and what of us will survive. She felt suddenly dizzy with it, with the magnitude of it all, of this, now, this day. As they walked on to the next case, and the next, and on into the next gallery, she imagined seeing them from the outside as others must. A woman in a tweed jacket and trousers and a slightly bashed up felt hat, and a younger, taller, hatless girl with a scarf that doesn't suit her auburn hair at all and trousers that are too small for her, and she wondered, did people think them friends, or a tutor and pupil, or even, this morning's giggles rose again, an aunt and a niece, or a godmother in a charge, and she suddenly thought, people don't think, they barely glance at two women, they don't wonder. And in this invisibility, a new prospect of freedom too, that you can in fact walk the city as yourself and no one knows or cares to. Sylvia, she said, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you exactly? 30 in August, Sylvia said. I'm ancient, so I am. My next birthday I'll be 20, Emma offered. Oh, don't, you're just a baby. No, but listen, Emma said. What I mean to say is, you must have done this before. Stood in the ancient artefacts room of the Belfast Municipal Museum and Art Gallery with Emma June Bell, aged 20 next birthday at, she checked her wristwatch, just gone midday on the morning of Good Friday 1941. She pretended to think, nope, first time ever. Emma smiled. You know what I mean, she said. And she lowered her voice, been with another woman like this. It's not that I mind, she added hurriedly, it's not that, it's just, how does it work? Oh, Emma, Sylvia said. She reached out, adjusted Emma's collar, adjusted her, Emma's now, yellow scarf. There are places, she said carefully. There are certain cafes, certain lounge bars. There are gatherings that friends of mine, friends of friends, have in their houses in South Belfast mostly, where actors go and cabaret singers, but not just actors and cabaret singers. I'll take you one day, so I will, she said. Maybe one day I'll take you. Emma looked at her. Why do you say it all so sadly? Do I? Oh, Emma, Sylvia turned away. This isn't something you choose. I choose it, said Emma, and her voice was too loud now. I choose it, Sylvia, this. A grey-haired woman turned to frown at her. A few seconds afterwards, a slow swivel aided by his stick, her elderly husband added his disapproval. In satisfied tandem, they glared. They can be my witnesses, Emma said. Emma, I choose this, you. You don't know anything yet. I do, said Emma. They stood. The woman shook her head theatrically and turned away, her husband in tow. See them, they're what you're up against, Sylvia said, and all they were objecting to was your noise. I don't care, said Emma. It's not their city anyway. Does it have their name on it? She didn't mean the childish jibe to sound so petulant, but it did, and they both started laughing. Come on, said Sylvia. Something I want to show you before we go. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lucy. I'm delighted you read that passage, and I'm looking forward to talking more about those characters and their relationship. But first, I want to introduce Jan. Jan Carson is a writer and community arts facilitator based in Belfast. Her first novel, Malcolm Orange Disappears, was followed by a short story collection, Children's Children, and 2 postcard stories anthologies. Her second novel, The Fire Starters, won the EU Prize for Literature. The Raptures, her third novel, was shortlisted for the An Post Novel of the Year and the Kerry Group Novel of the Year. Jan's short stories have won the Harper's Bazaar Short Story Competition and been shortlisted for the BBC National Short Story Award, the An Post Irish Short Story of the Year, and the Sean O'Faolin Short Story Prize. Her new collection, Quickly While They Still Have Horses, is forthcoming in spring 2024. Welcome, Jan. Look forward to hearing you read.
Hello folks, it is really lovely to be here tonight. I'm always surprised anyone actually comes out to see us because I don't know if you've heard of us before. So it's lovely to just see the room so full. I'm going to read tonight from The Raptures, which was my last novel. It's been well read from. You can see the pages are starting to fall out of it now. The great thing about being in America is that hopefully nobody from home is here who knows my mother or my family, so I can be a wee bit more honest. And I can tell you, this is a novel which is set in 1993 in a fictional village called Ballylack, which might bear some resemblance to Kells outside Ballymena, where I grew up. It's about an 11-year-old girl called Hannah who was brought up in a fundamentalist evangelical Presbyterian household, not unlike the one in which I was brought up. And it follows her through a very weird summer where all of her school friends begin to get ill and die one at a time, and she's left. That doesn't sound like much crack, but it's actually quite a funny book as well. I'm going to read you 3 pages, which will probably take about 4 minutes. So if you don't like it, 4 minutes of sleeping. If you do enjoy it, 4 minutes that you might want to savour. This is the point where Hannah's beginning to understand that perhaps the way she's been brought up isn't the only way to do things. And I don't know any of your backgrounds, but some of you might have been through this. Every time I ask about the pictures, Dad says, "Cinema starts with sin, you know." I don't know what he's talking about. We drive past the State Cinema on the way to church, and the sign's definitely spelt with a C. I've never been to the pictures, but we do have a television in our house. Cinema's pretty much the same as telly, it's just on a bigger screen. Every night after dinner, Dad watches the news. I'd rather watch EastEnders like everybody else, but it's banned in our house because the people in it are always swearing and getting divorced. The news is better than nothing, and while Mum's redding up the dishes, I get Dad and Hannah time. When there's bad stuff reported, and there's never a night when nobody dies, Dad makes a clickety noise with his tongue. He shakes his head. "Dear, dear," he mutters, and writes the details down in his notebook. Car accident, Auchnacloy, 2 killed, pipe bomb, Crossmaglen, 4 army injured, incendiary device in C&A. I never say anything. I click my tongue and make the same sad noise as Dad. News isn't for discussing, it's for praying about later on. I can tell from watching the news that most folk are fed up with the troubles. The people who get interviewed are always crying or looking angry and also crying because more people have got themselves killed. People have had enough of it. No more bombs, they say. No more shootings. No more army boys on the streets. We want something better for our weans. Them lot need to wise up and start talking to each other. I'm not sure who stopped talking to who. Ian Paisley's never done talking, and Jerry Adams has talked so much they've got somebody else to do his voice for him. I suspect it's the ones in the balaclavas who need to talk, maybe to each other or to the police. I don't know why we have the troubles here, but I know it's us children who deserve something better. We're the future of Northern Ireland. We had a special assembly about it last month. A woman came down from Londonderry. Principal Taylor arranged for her to speak to the older ones. There'd have been no point in her talking to the juniors about serious stuff like the Troubles and Peace. Until P4, you only do playing and colouring in. The women arrived in the afternoon. This meant we got out of maths, so everybody was in cracking form. The lady had a fellow with her from the paper. He made us line up in the playground for a photo. Boys at the back, girls at the front. Leaf with the girls because he's wild tiny for a boy. We held a big banner in front of our legs so you could only see us from the middle up. It was yellow with the words, "The Future of Northern Ireland," written on the front in shiny black letters. Just before he clicked the camera, the man made a face and stuck his tongue out, and we're all cracking up in the photograph. Principal Taylor pinned it up on the notice board. Now, we don't usually have women take an assembly. It's nearly always ministers, and ministers are always men. They come in to do a wee Bible lesson and say a prayer. The best ones bring puppets or flannel graph. Sometimes we sing a couple of choruses, only if it's one of Mrs. Getty's days with P5. She's the only teacher who knows how to play the piano, and the singing sounds woeful without it. Like cats in a tumble dryer, Kathleen says. Now, the ministers are never from our church because our church isn't in Ballylack, it's in the town, 5 miles away. Pastor Bill wouldn't mind driving out. It's just that there's half a dozen other churches in the village and they get first dibs on visiting our school. Dad says it's okay to listen to other ministers. They're Protestants like us, just a different kind. We're the evangelical charismatic sort, which means we believe in getting saved and also going to hell. Jesus and the Holy Spirit. In our church, the women wear hats. We use the Bible with the old-fashioned words, but sing modern choruses off the overhead projector. We speak in tongues and do special praying with hands on. We don't believe in the cinema or chewing gum. Now, the chewing gum thing might just be my parents, because I've seen ones from the Youth Fellowship blowing bubblegum bubbles round the back of the Minor Hall. We're not the popular kind of Protestant. There aren't that many of us. In Ballylack, there's only us and Granny and Mrs. Nugent. In the town, it's a bit better. There's enough to fill a medium-sized church, and at Christmas and Easter, it's pretty bummed. Granda Pete's not our sort of Protestant. I'm not sure what kind he actually is. Granda says prods are like potatoes. There's 5 dozen different varieties, but they're all much of a muchness when you peel them back. The woman who came to our school was called Sinead, which means she was probably a Roman Catholic. You can tell from their names and how they keep their gardens. Catholics are more through other than us. After the assembly, I heard her talking to Miss McEwen. Jesus, she said, I could murder a coffee. I knew she definitely wasn't a Protestant then. Protestants don't take the Lord's name in vain. Sinead had come to tell us we were the future of Northern Ireland. We needed to work together for peace. Well, I already knew a bit about this.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was wonderful. And last but absolutely no means least, we have Michelle, who's going to read from her novel, Factory Girls. Michelle Gallen grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, a few miles from the border. She studied English literature at Trinity College in Dublin and publishing at Stirling University. Michelle's debut novel, Big Girls, Small Town, was shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award. Her critically acclaimed second novel, Factory Girls, won the Comedy Women in Print Award and was shortlisted for the RSL Encore Award. Both books are being adapted for TV. Congratulations, Michelle. So love to hear from you.
You know, they're really good at going, thank you everyone, and saying all the right things. I'm just really grateful to be here. My Irish grandfather, as I think of him, because he spoke with a big Irish accent, was born in Philadelphia. But he moved back to Ireland when he was 5 because his dad died and his sister, well, basically they all died and got buried here in Philadelphia. So I have bones not 20 minutes away from here. So I'm just really pleased to be like back in the ancestral burial grounds. And Daddy just sent me a wee photograph of my granddad kneeling at his dad's grave when he got to go back before he died, sort of a thing. So from that point of view, it's just really special to be here. And really special to see loads of you out as well. It's freezing out there. I know it gets colder, but it's a really cold night. So this is Factory Girls, my second book, and it's set in the summer of 1994, and it kind of stars 3 girls who've got through their exams, have applied to all the best colleges they can think of, and they're waiting for their exam results to kind of get out of this shitty wee town that they've grown up in. So you've got Maeve, who's the kind of smart but furious one. You've got Caroline, who's just a dote, and dote means lovely girl. And then you've got Aoife, who's really, really book smart and really street stupid. So anyway, the bit I'm going to read is actually when Maeve and Fidelma, who's a factory worker, and Caroline get an extra £5 for working late in the factory, because they all take a factory job for the summer to try and earn a bit of money so they'll have money in their pocket when they get to university. So here's them laying into a wee Chinese takeaway after work. I keep trying to imagine you living in the thick of them over there in London, Fidelma said, before chomping on a poppadom. Hard to picture. I think I'll manage it, Maeve said. At least I hope so. Are you sure now, Fidelma said. I mind you the day the one peace choir came to St. Jude's. Och, Fidelma, Caroline said. Maeve was only 14. As she was, but she put the pure frighteners on them. Maeve always felt a bit sick when she thought of the Middletown male peace choir. She'd gone as usual that day into the gym for morning assembly along with the whole school. Fatty Dolan had been standing on stage like she always did, staring everyone into acceptable behaviour. But their form teachers had flanked the rows of seats like guards. Seats were only brought out for special occasions like a bishop's visit or a talk by a past pupil on how to emigrate. But they'd not had a word of an event, which made Maeve suspect that a British politician and a load of troops were going to be parachuted in on top of them for a 5-minute photo opportunity. Well, Fatty Dolan blessed herself. She rhymed off a few prayers, and then she gave out yards to the whole school for something that everybody knew Linus McMurphy had done. But then eventually she paused. She clasped her hands together so tight, Maeve wondered if she'd break a finger. This morning, she said, using her special voice, we will experience an extraordinary performance by some visiting musicians. Well, the gym doors squeaked open, and Maeve knew without turning her head to gawk that John Bon Jovi hadn't entered the building. Well, a bluster of smiling men trooped up the hall, shiny with sweat, and she could tell by the cut of their jeans, their soft bellies and the big heads on them that they were English. Behind Maeve, Cormac Kelly rumbled, fee, fi, fo, fum. And that just triggered the line, I smell the blood of an Englishman in everybody's head. Well, Fatty Dolan had to eyeball Cormac, who slumped down in his seat, but he was grinning. The men climbed on stage and formed into lines. I'd like you all to welcome the Middletown Male Peace Choir to the school, Fatty said. And Fatty and the teachers clapped thunderously while a wee skift of applause kind of swept through the pupils. Mr. Orr, the science teacher from Ardoyne, he stood with his arms crossed. The Middletown Male Peace Choir is touring Northern Ireland, Fatty said, singing voluntarily in schools and halls in yet another attempt to promote peace and reconciliation. Now, Maeve had already seen the choir, right? They'd been on the telly earlier that week in some community hall up the Falls Road, belting out From a Distance. The BBC had interviewed the choir master, some beardy bloke, and he explained after the little kids were killed in the Warrington bombs, his choir felt that they couldn't just stand idly by for 1 minute longer, doing nothing. So they decided to put their own lives at risk by touring Northern Ireland to sing songs of peace. Dick, Maeve's mum had said, a word Maeve did not know her mum knew right up until that minute. Something twanged inside Maeve as a baldy fella strummed the opening chords of a song she knew she'd never love again. And 25 overweight English blokes started singing the Eurovision classic, A Little Peace. When they finished, most of the teachers clapped, but the pupils were wise to the situation now. They crossed their arms like Mr. Orr, leaving it to lick arses like Jeremy Crockett to clap. Well, the guitar player stepped back to the mic and he cleared his throat and he said, your head mistress, she tells me you lot know this next song, so this time we'd like you all to sing, yeah. And he gestured at a bloke on the piano who started playing the opening of Imagine. So they got as far as hell before Maeve stood up, and McVeigh gestured at her to sit the fuck down. But Maeve picked her way across a tangle of trainers and ankle boots, and she stalked out of the assembly hall, and she slammed through the front doors of the school, and she came to a stop in the yard. A coach was parked at the school gates, sandwiched between 4 armoured RUC cars and 2 Brit jeeps. So Maeve stood still at a loss for something to do, and then the doors opened behind her, and she turned round with her jaw out and her arms crossed, ready to face McVeigh or Fatty Dolan or whoever. But Joanne McGlinchey from the 6th form came bowling out, with Paddy the Muck from 7th year tearing up behind her. Fuck them. Who do they think they are? Fucking singing at us. More and more students came pouring out of the car park, and Mr. Orr came out grinning for the first time ever since 1973, and he started singing the Fields of Athenry, and everyone joined in, and they were belting the song out at the bus, at the RUC, and the English choir were left standing in the assembly hall. Deirdre, Maeve's sister, walked up to her with one eyebrow raised. Nice one, she said, and Maeve glowed with pride. But you know you're dead meat, right? And Deirdre wasn't wrong, because 10 minutes later, Maeve was summoned to Fatty Dolan's office, and she'd marched in defiant as Roddy McCarley stepping up to them gallows on the bridge of Toon. But when she saw the beardy choirmaster bloke sitting there, she knew what was coming her way was going to be way worse than being hung, drawn and quartered. She turned on her heel and she tried to scoot out the door, but Fatty barred the way. "Sit down, Maeve Murray," she said. And Maeve slunk over to the empty seat beside the English bloke, and he was looking at her with a concern. That's an expression she'd never seen in an English face before. She sat down and crossed her arms and looked straight ahead. "So, Maeve, Mr. Smith here wants to speak to you," Fatty said, staring hard at Maeve, and something in Fatty's eyes told Maeve that this confrontation hadn't been her idea, and that she wanted Maeve to do whatever was necessary to make these men go away as quickly and quietly as possible, ideally before the press arrived. Maeve winced at the beardy bloke's pronunciation of her name. "I just wanted to say we're here to show a hope for a brighter future. We're here to..." And inside Maeve screamed, "Please don't say build bridges and tear down walls." Build bridges and tear down the walls of hatred that have been built up here in Northern Ireland. And Mr. Smith used his wee hands to demonstrate the act of wrenching down walls. And Maeve tried to swallow her emotions, and she could tell by the twitch on Fatty Dolan's face that she was going through a similar struggle. And Maeve knew that this Egypt wasn't to blame for all the shit they had to shovel. She knew that all she had to let him do was burble on, so he'd head out the door eventually, feeling like he'd made a difference. And she sat in silence until eventually he quit talking. And Fatty took a deep breath, and she laid her wee hands down on the desk. "We appreciate your gesture, Mr. Smith." And then she turned to Maeve and she said, "Now, Maeve, is there something you want to say to Mr. Smith?" Maeve shook her head, and Fatty stared wide-eyed at her. And then she stared slitty-eyed right back at her. And then Mr. Smith laid his big English paw on her shoulder. "Look, Maeve, I'm Irish too," he said. "My mum's from Leitrim. My dad's from Kerry." Leitrim and Kerry. The sort of ungodly union that only ever happens in an Irish dance hall over in London. "Mr. Smith, don't kid yourself, you're Irish," Maeve said, shrugging his hand off her shoulder. "Maeve Murray," she ignored Fatty. Something had burst inside her. She wasn't fit to stop. You can talk shite about your Irish blood, but I'll tell you for free, you're sure as fuck not Irish. Language, Miss Murray. What you don't get is I'm not even Irish, not proper Irish. I just want to be. But all I am to the Free Staters is a dirty northerner. I'm as pathetic as the prods trying to be British when your lot think they're just a pack of paddies. And when you don't want them, and them down south don't want us, everyone wants us to crawl away and die someplace dark where they don't have to listen to us squealing for attention. Of course, Maeve went and ruined her speech by bursting into tears, at which point Fatty marched her out the door and locked her in the caretaker's storeroom. Maeve sat picking at her nails under the naked light bulbs, surrounded by bleach, scourers and mop buckets, wondering if she'd ever be able to scrub her feelings away.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, all of you. I just have to say that I really enjoyed these three books. I've been reading them all the last few weeks, and I loved them. And, they're really different. I think everyone could hear that tonight, how different they are. But obviously there's, common themes. And where I want to start is really just the question of Northern Ireland, and it's come into all of the readings. And I was struck by the fact that all of you were born during the Troubles and sort of came of age or into adulthood around the time of the Good Friday Agreement. And so I'd love to just understand a little bit more about what that was like. I might start with Jan and then kind of work back up the panel on that, just to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm probably sitting at one extreme end of the experience. So I was raised in outside Ballymena, which was a very, very, Liam Neeson once called it a Protestant hole, and I think that's quite a good definition of it. If it doesn't move, we paint it red, white and blue in Ballymena. But I was born into a very kind of very, very, very religious family, and we were actually apolitical. You may have noted there's a little line in the reading that I just read where Hannah says, people went and got themselves killed. And that was the way I always was brought up, to refer to the Troubles, that it was only bad people who got involved in that kind of thing, which is a load of nonsense. But we didn't vote in our house, we didn't really get involved in politics or the world in any way. And so for a great deal of my life, it was very, very, very sheltered. I didn't know any Catholics, there were none in our neighbourhood. So my first experience of not just kind of the division in Northern Ireland really, but the fact that my own existence wasn't the only way to do life was when I arrived at Queen's in 1998, about just a few months after the Good Friday Agreement had been signed. And the first thing that I did was get myself a pass for the QFT, which is the art house cinema in Belfast, because I hadn't been allowed to go to the cinema. And it was such an eye-opener for me. So arts and culture was really my journey into kind of learning about not just differences in Northern Ireland, but differences in experiences across the board. And it was a very exciting time to be kind of not coming out in the way we now use coming out, but coming out as a hopefully slightly more fully formed human being, because it felt like the country was also kind of coming out of itself. And every sort of small change at that point, the first tourists who actually took their life in their hands and came to Northern Ireland on holidays, the first time that big rock bands actually planned their tours to come and play in Belfast, all of that felt very exciting to be young at that time. I'll give the optimistic bit of it. I'm sure the negative stuff will come out as well. No, I'm just generally looking down the room.
Well, it's good to get some optimism anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, so my experience, I'm the child of what is termed in Northern Ireland a mixed marriage. My dad is from an Ulster Protestant background. My mum is from an English Catholic family of Irish origin. So she met my dad in Bristol, where she's from, when he was studying for his master's degree, and they fell in love, and she moved to Belfast in 1975. And they decided that if they were going to have a family, both of them, for various reasons, were no longer churchgoers independently. And they decided they were going to raise any family that they had, they weren't going to raise them as churchgoers. And so my sisters and I, we were born, we lived in East Belfast, which is kind of by default a largely Protestant area. And I think when we're talking about the Good Friday Agreement, the biggest failure of the Good Friday Agreement is that schools are still more than 90% segregated along religious lines in Northern Ireland, still. So the school that I went to was a few Catholic people, but the majority Protestant. I played the violin growing up, always from when I was about 4 or 5. So I played in local orchestras that were cross community. And my experience was any rebel songs that I know come via my Ulster Protestant dad, because there's a tradition of Irishness and of the United Irishmen and of the Protestant Ulstermen considering themselves Irish as well. My dad's greatest ambition for his girls growing up is that we'd be able to play like fiddle-dee-dee music, as we might have called it. So if there was ever a session in a pub, there could be a lock-in and we could join in the Ceilidh. So already you see that's a kind of complicated picture of Irishness. My mum, who went to a school, she passed 11+, went to a school run by nuns. They used to hit them with rulers if they didn't talk properly. So my mum has a very soft RP English accent, which in Belfast, my sisters and I, we think in solidarity to my mum, we never had a Belfast accent, we always had my mum's accent. And we remember the ways that she was misread and mistreated and kind of bullied, because in the north, a soft English accent reads as aspirational and upper class and Protestant, not as working class and Catholic. So my whole thing has always been about, complicating the picture, complicating the narrative. I got obsessed with the sarin nerve gas attacks on the Tokyo Underground when I was a teenager. My mum always used to buy the Independent newspaper, and a Buddhist monk wrote in and said, whoever this sect is called, they may call themselves Buddhists, but they're not Buddhists because Buddhists believe, and he listed some things that Buddhists believe. That was a portal for me. I wrote to this monk, and for most of the rest of my teenage years and into my 20s, we corresponded. He was a Buddhist monk in a monastery in England. And so what I find really interesting is, say, I love theology. I would have done if I did another degree, it would be in theology. Everyone always tries to classify me as, say, a Protestant writer, or no one ever thinks, well, what are your spiritual beliefs? What are your views on reincarnation? So for me, the Good Friday Agreement, I grew up with a British passport. And the Good Friday Agreement, for a certain sort of number of us of a particular age and a particular generation, it was just such a freedom to do and be both. I hold both passports. Neither tell the full story because I regard myself as Northern Irish, but it's not possible to have Northern Irish citizenship. But for a few of us, it's that, for me, it's always about resisting binaries, resisting ossification of narratives, insisting on plurality and insisting on being able to be both and, not just either or. And so that's something of where I come from, something that I think is always really important in my writing.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad that monk, or the Buddhist monk, wrote back to you. I mean, how amazing was that? Yeah. As a teenager, I can imagine just that opening up of other ways of thinking. Michelle, what are your thoughts? We heard Maeve's thoughts, right? I'd love to know yours. Is it close to your experience?
You see, I got asked to talk about the Good Friday Agreement by a few people, and I kept going, why do I not remember it? But that was the year I got a brain injury. And so I had been living and working in London, and I ended up being sent home to my parents in a wheelchair because I had autoimmune encephalitis. So, wow. But the Good Friday Agreement in the time, so I went through this whole thing. I grew up in a town that was very deprived. We were the economic black spot in the Western developed world. You couldn't get worse than our town, and we had a lot of violence and the Troubles. There was a lot of deaths. There was a lot of tension. Our town was very much divided. I mean, the first time I knowingly met a Protestant, as in I knew that this was a Protestant I was meeting, was in the back of an armoured police car with police and machine guns, because they picked us up from our Catholic school. And they picked up two Protestants from the Protestant school, put us in a police car, and said, now you're going to be a quiz team, and you're going to... and you're like, brilliant.
That really happened.
Well, yeah, it did. I have the trophy still, we were the...
Sounds like you earned that trophy.
In fairness, I still don't know their names. These were people I grew up... So we were in a really divided town, and the sort of town, I can remember... one day our English teacher was off, and this is first year, we were 12 years old in secondary school, so we this sub teacher, and I think they may have had notions of wanting to be a writer or something, so they said, okay, today, because your teacher's sick, I want you all to write your obituary.
Right, and we're 12-year-old.
And we're 12, and we're write our obituary, brilliant. And the poor old teacher, because they didn't know what they were getting into, right? They were drowned in the gallery. They says, right, Kevin Connolly, would you read your obituary? And he goes, volunteer Kevin Connolly, died aged 17 in a hail of bullets, fighting bravely against the British Army. And she was like, okay, now let's move on to you. And she really didn't understand that all the boys had their idea of success was to die in their teens fighting against what they saw as oppression. And the girls wanted to be hairdressers and nurses or teachers. I don't know why we didn't think of the IRA as a valid career choice at that time. So my community was very much, didn't really believe in peace, and we didn't really believe in the Good Friday Agreement. We didn't believe that things were going to get better, but they have. It's really surprising that when you take the guns away and you tell people that there's another path, that things it's so much nicer when people aren't getting blown up or shot. So yeah, that's my take. That's not a dark take. That's fairly optimistic.
I just realised as well, I did top of the forum as well.
Yeah.
The quiz thing.
Yeah.
So we were the winners.
You weren't the other people in
No,
the
we didn't get very far.
Yeah.
The Catholic school were much cleverer than us.
Yeah. Oh no, but we were a mixed team. We were the Catholic and
the Catholic part of our team was good and we were rubbish.
Yeah, that was the same in ours. Yeah. We knew everything, and the Protestants just sat there. I didn't know if they were making a protest, not answering. We were just smart.
A statement by their silence. Oh, brilliant. Oh, no, that's so helpful. And, you know, as somebody who grew up in Dublin around the same time, I feel like I didn't have such a lens into, you know, reading your novels gave me a lens into what the experience was like. And I didn't even know how segregated schools still are, like, until you just said that, Lucy. So I have learned something already this evening. And I wanted to just talk about, apart from the Northern Irish experience, obviously the female experience is one that comes through in all of your novels. You've such rich female characters, girls, young women, older women. And what I wanted to ask about was the mother-daughter relationships in the novels. I couldn't help feel that as writers, apart from just drawing these wonderful characters, you were using them as sort of devices to show what had changed for women and what hadn't changed and what was still the same. And I wonder if that was intentional, and I'd love you all to speak about the mother-daughter relationships a little bit. I'm going to start with you, Lucy, on that question.
So in my novel, it starts off with the two sisters. We're very much in their perspective. And then I wanted this idea that to Emma especially, you know, she's 19, her mother is just her annoying mother who expresses her disapproval by the angle of her knitting needles, you know.
It's great.
And then as the novel goes on, you realise that actually her mother lost the love of her life at the Somme, and her mother, a bit of her soul was left there, and her mother has just been going through the motions of her own life. Her mother can't quite believe that she's married and she has 3 children, and you know, she's getting old, and it just the whole of her life has passed her by. So we move from the daughter to the mother. And I think it's so interesting, you know, so much of my early work when I started out writing when I was very young, it was about mother-daughter relationships, about sisters, and it only takes 1 or 2 actors who would start to say, it's very rare for there to be roles for women that aren't predicated on their relationship to men, you know, like sister of, girlfriend of, and you think the world that we all grew up in, it was, you know, very male-dominated in the public sphere, you know, male politicians, male religious leaders, male soldiers on the streets, with a couple of notable examples like Mo Mowlam, the Women's Coalition, who my mother would have voted for. But you realise that there are such strong women, there are all these women's stories, and so I think, and that mother-daughter relationship, you know, as I said, for me, growing up with my sisters, we were very, very close. And very close to my mum. And when I first read about the Bronte siblings, I had this rush of recognition. We used to spend our whole time making up worlds, and we would make up these worlds with our Lego people, we would write the books, we would, you know, build the dolls, we would just lived in these fantasy worlds. And kind of, when I was about 13, the sort of greatest psychic trauma of my life was having to grow up and not be able to play Lego with my little sisters, you know, and have to sort of break away from my mum. Since becoming a mother myself, I find it's a really interesting perspective because you can sort of go both ways. You don't need to have children to be able to write that, you know, well. But one thing that it did for me is one thing that happens when you have a child of your own is you feel very instantly part of a different generation. You don't need a child for that to happen, but it certainly happened for me, that you think anew of the ways that you were raised and the things that you took for granted, you know, and the blueprints and you have a chance to reassess all of those. And there's a story in my collection, Intimacies, it's very much about motherhood, that's called Words for Things. And there's a line in the story that goes, there are things that we didn't know were things because there were no words for them. And it's 2 mothers, they've just come out of a baby swimming class, they're discussing Monica Lewinsky, and they're both pulled up in their tracks by realising that Monica Lewinsky was 22. She was a 22-year-old woman when she had the whole weight of everything on her shoulders. And these young mothers are suddenly thinking, like, fuck, you know, and they're sort of reassessing. And so for me, one of the things about mother-daughter relationships as well is that kind of, exactly as you said, that generational lens, that you can reassess things, you know, and you have a conscious moment where you can try to choose to do things differently for your children.
No, I love that. And the Florence character, the mother, that you have a wonderful line about how it's like, I'm going to butcher the line, but it's like, it's not that she's not unhappy, she's just bemused about how her life is like. And it reminded me, actually, you have a great line, you all have great lines, but there was a line that Maeve says about, I think it's when she's in Caroline's house, she's worried about sitting down on the couch and waking up in her 50s.
Yeah.
Like, as if she has like no agency whatsoever and all of that. So maybe you could just speak to the mother-daughter thing as well, Michelle.
Because I love that dynamic. So my first book, in Big Girl Small Town, Majella is like this fat autistic woman who works in a chipper, and her grandmother's been murdered and her dad's disappeared, her uncle's been blown up, and she just basically, since the grandmother's murder, all the media have descended on the town, and everybody in the town's really excited because they haven't seen like the media since the end of the Troubles. You know, once you had the ceasefire, nobody looked at Northern Ireland. And so everybody's delighted, but poor old Majella is there, she wants to hide. But Majella is left in this tiny council house with her alcoholic, opioid-addicted mother. And I always have these mothers in my books where the daughter doesn't understand the mother's story. And I think this is something that you understand the further you get from being like, well, just the older you get and the more perspective you have. So Majella doesn't completely understand her mother's backstory, which is that, you know, she was abused in her own family. She's cut off her entire family. Her husband, who was in the IRA, has disappeared, and she's now an IRA widow, and you can't just walk out and get remarried when you're like, she's really stuck. But Majella has no real concept of how to mind her mother other than making sure she's got whiskey and opioids, you know. And then in Factory Girls, Maeve's mum is a woman who was part of that Catholic generation that actually got to university, like smart, clever, grammar school, got through, got a place in university, and then got kicked out during the Civil Rights March, which did happen. People, even Bernadette Devlin got kicked out from her degree in Queen's for marching for civil rights. And so in the book again, it's all written from Maeve's perspective, and she just doesn't understand why she's got this angry, frustrated mother. She doesn't understand what's wrong with her mother. There's this woman who's like, why isn't she happy, like living in a tiny council house with a dead daughter, 4 sons, and no job? Like, she's like, what's wrong with my mum? And I think that's something that I'm really interested in exploring. And I mean, that's not just a Northern Irish thing. That's an economic, opportunities thing. Yeah. It's about how women, or what women were allowed to achieve, what women tried to achieve, what you ended up achieving if you didn't use contraception. Use contraception. So I love the whole women in a society where, like in Northern Ireland, if something, and this will go to a dark place, but if something bad happened us growing up, you couldn't go to the police, because as a Catholic nationalist, you can't go to the police. You're definitely not going to go to the priest. And you can't go to the priest because he's going to judge you. And you can't go to your dad or your uncles. And you can't really go to the IRA. So who do you go to when something bad's happening? Because the women that you can go to can't do anything other than trying to draw that circle around you. So this is something else that I've been exploring, because it had such a big impact on us as girls, as teens, and as women.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for articulating that so well. It's so rich. And Jan, I'm thinking about, you touched on it earlier in the part that you read. In Hannah's world, it's always the men who are the ministers, so there's this other layer of this evangelical Protestantism. So, but we see I think we see a lot of change in Hannah's mom in the book and their relationship. So maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, first of all, I'll say I hate writing women. This is probably the only book that I have written.
Really?
I much prefer writing men.
Well, you do it very well,
So Hannah's mum is a woman who is part of a kind of faith community where women are silenced and don't have an opportunity to lead or really have a voice. And across the novel, she goes on a kind of slow journey towards a little bit more autonomy. And that was something I thought about a lot in terms of where is the point of believability in this journey? We always want to read books about aspirational characters who buck the system and do really brave things. But the reality is most people who don't have a lot of power can only push it so far. So Hannah's mother is never going to, shout at her husband or storm out because she would lose everything. And so I was trying to show this is something that I hope young women in these communities read and see a little bit of kind of change and growth, and something that seems achievable. And that has been lovely to hear, not just women in this kind of Protestant evangelical community being inspired by that, but I was in France for a long time last year, and I met a lot of young Muslim women who are trying to negotiate that. What does it mean to be a modern woman? And respect the tradition that you're born into and respect your parents, but also to challenge some of the things in that system. So there was that, and I was also really interested in soft power for women, because I think particularly in the community I grew up, but I think it was also in the Catholic community as well. And Lucy's really interested in this too. You saw people like nuns who did have a degree of power, and some of them, yes, used the power in abusive ways, but others used the power to educate and to nurture young women, and maybe they didn't get their pictures getting the glory moment. And we see that in politics too. You see it in Northern Ireland, the people who were pictured on the day the Good Friday Agreement was signed. There's a lot of women in the background who only recently have got acknowledged. And I've seen that very much in my own mother's life. So my father was Presbyterian clergy. And so my father was a lovely man, but quite a weak man. My mum wore the trousers. And she told him how to make decisions in the church world and how she knew everything that was going on in the church. And my father passed away quite suddenly 2 years ago. And my mum has lost all recourse to power. She doesn't know what's going on. She hasn't got a voice anymore. So I began to look at that and those power systems that happen off camera. So what happens in the kitchen in churches when women are sharing their lives and their hurts and their griefs, and how they're parenting, what's happening in the backroom in Stormont. And I think things are definitely changing. We're seeing many, many more women who are taking front and central roles, but there's a whole history of women who haven't had their roles acknowledged, and I'm quite interested in that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, we touched on this a little earlier about like the idea of binary thinking and division. I mean, just following on from what you just said, Jan, do you feel like, is there a legacy still of that divide of religion in Northern Ireland, or, you know, how is that really playing out?
I'll say, you know, yes, there is. You know, as Lucy mentioned, 91% of our schools are segregated. There's more peace wall now, separating areas in Belfast than there was in 1998. You know, the legacy of division is there, but I think there's something much more important in what you said just there, which is binary thinking. If you bring up young people separate to think that their way of doing things is entirely right and that everything else is wrong, you're beginning to instill this way of not being able to empathise, not being able to see nuance, not being able to steer your way through some of those skills that we really need to navigate a complex situation like Northern Ireland. You have to be able to put yourself in another person's shoes. You have to be able to respect a story that is not your own. You have to be able to be quiet and listen sometimes. And our kids being brought up in in my school system, we got empire history, nothing about Irish history. I thought that the Easter Rising was another name for the resurrection. You're laughing, but that is mortifying to learn at 29 when you are giving guided tours of a historical building in Belfast. I'm ashamed of that. I have no Celtic mythology, I have no traditional music, and I thought my way of doing things was the only way to do that. And I know there were other schools in Ballymena that were getting the other side of the story. And to me, it's why, I'll say this very briefly, it's why the arts are so important, because there is no binaryism in art. It's about perception, it's about enjoying the moment, it's learning how to disagree well. You know, I think Picasso's pretty crap. I'm sorry, I'm quite surprised nobody was shocked about that. But there are people in the room who probably love Picasso, and neither of those opinions are right or wrong. They're just opinions. And if you bring kids up understanding that nuance and how to navigate those grey areas, where you release them into a society where they can have actually interesting, productive conversations, So if there's anyone in the room who has power to give us back the funding in the arts in Northern Ireland that propped up a lot of the peace and reconciliation process for the last 25 years, we need it back. It was doing a lot of heavy lifting, folks. And I want that for our young people because it really benefited me, and I will shut up.
Françoise Gillot features in my book. She's an artist, and she wrote a beautiful memoir called My Life with Picasso. And she had 2 children by Picasso, and in the book, the tagline is always, she's the only woman ever to leave him. And she writes her diaries, and she writes this book about realising that she had to leave him if she was going to survive psychically and if she was going to survive as an artist. She died last year, age 97, and she's as good in art. Her mother-baby drawings are exquisite. So when you throw out the Picasso thing, my instinctive response is, let's think about Françoise Gillot.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, I think just the whole conversation about different opinions and binary thinking and the role of literature is so interesting. I mean, it's not escaping my thinking right now that we're sitting here, in a swing state in the election next year, and the ability to be able to understand each other's points of view and, work towards a common ground, I think is definitely something literature can help us with.
Can I just say one more thing really quickly, very quickly? I'm sure he has some complexities that not everyone loves him, but I have a great deal of respect for Senator George Mitchell, who came across and helped negotiate. Mostly because I've heard him say many, many times that when he arrived to Northern Ireland, he understood he would have to listen for a very long time before he said anything. And I'm just going to leave that in the room.
Thank you, Jen. So I have tons more questions. I'm going to ask one more super quick question of each of you, and then we're going to go to show of hands. And I'm asking this question because I know there's writers in the room and there's students in the room, and it's something people might want to know. What's the best piece of writing advice you've ever been given? And if you've never been given good writing advice, now is the time to make up some good writing advice and give it to other people. So we go quickly down the line. I'll start with you, Michelle.
One is don't name names. And the other one is I wanted to quit writing, and one of my friends gave me permission to quit writing, but the other one said, no, don't quit writing, quit everything else. And that was the best advice.
So what was the everything else, watching EastEnders?
Startups. Everything that's not, if it's that Buddhist thing of if you've got a jar, put the big rock in first.
Okay.
And when you put the big rock in every day, then everything else will soak up, but you can't retrofit the big rock. So it's about that. Do the key thing first.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you. Lucy?
I think I would say that every single person has the most beautiful treasure trove of stories to tell. That usually, a lot of the time, we kind of disavow or we reject because we wish we had other stories. We think that there are other better stories elsewhere in the world. And I think that it's there in someone like Martin Buber. That will talk about how, in that fairy tale way, you might go all around the world to discover that the treasure is really buried under your own kitchen hearth. And I think that every single person has their unique perspective, has stories that only they can tell, and those are the stories and they might be stories, they might not necessarily be things that happen to you, they might be things that only you can imagine, they might be things that only your heart knows, but those are your stories. And I think for women especially, it's so easy to dismiss those stories or to reject them, kind of because they're yours. And so I would say that there is a particular treasure that everyone has. One of the images of the cosmos that I love the most comes from mystical Islam. It's a sort of Sufi way of seeing the world, and it's seeing the whole of creation as a sort of vibrational structure, like a big harp. And if every single person isn't vibrating to the particular note, the particular frequency that only they can, the whole thing is out of tune. Wow. So if you're trying to be, I would be like a terrible Michelle. If I tried to write, I love Michelle's stories and they're so funny, and I just could not write that. And so if I tried to, not only would I be a terrible Michelle, I wouldn't be writing the stories I could either,
Right.
And so it's like imitating someone else or trying to be something else throws the whole of creation out of joint. And so it's being true to, you know, the stories that you are, much as you might wish that you had other stories, or you'd grown up in another place, or that you didn't have to tackle Belfast or whatever it might be. That would be what I'd say.
Well, I love that image of the
Yeah,
harp. I'm
gorgeous,
going to take
isn't
that
it?
with me. Thank you, Lucy. Jen?
I'm going to say something really horrible. The world isn't waiting to hear your story. And I think that's what I always start my workshops with, because the thing you hear over and over again is, I've always meant to write a book, I've always meant to get around to writing that story. Well, it's not going to get written if you don't do it. And there's just that element of learning how to be your own big stick. If you don't put your own bum in the seat every day and write, you're not going to get anything written. So learning how to self-motivate is a huge, huge thing. And the flip side to that is the first thing that you write is going to be rubbish. It really is. And just kind of getting over yourself and your own perfectionism. There's a huge amount of, teachers love it when you go in and say this to their students, because that's what they say to their students over and over again, and they don't believe it. But it's mostly just hard work and keeping going.
What's yours, Yvonne?
Gosh, turning the tables on me. I think mine would be, I mean, I was thinking about what Jan was saying about what Anne Lamott says about the shitty first draft, right, and not being afraid of it. But I think my best piece of writing advice would be to finish it. That has been, I remember a writing teacher saying that to me years ago, that like so many people say, well, why am I not published? Why is my work not out there? And it's like, just finish it. And finish it meaning it's taking it from that, to use Anne Lamott's shitty first draft phase, to the best that it can be, the best representation of the story that I can make it. So that would be my little 2 cents on that. Thank you for asking. Okay, so now it's time for Q&A. So I don't know if someone who's in charge of the lights could maybe put the lights up a bit so we could see. And anyone who has a question, please raise your hand high. We have no roving mic, so please project your voice when I call on you.
See you.
Yes, we can see you now. So we're on the lookout for hands. So if anyone has a question, yes.
Was there sort of, or kind of like a time or place where you all maybe want to take this career path and write these stories?
I'm just going to repeat that back to make sure everyone heard it. So was there a time or place that everyone knew they were on this career path to write these stories? So I don't know who wants to jump in first on that one.
I was going to be a football commentator. That's my career path.
Unexpected answer.
And then I ended up working for the Presbyterian Church for about 10 years and being a minister, kind of, not a minister, but that kind of adjacent thing. And then I moved to Portland in Oregon in 2005 and decided to have a stab at writing, and I had to scare myself into it. So I told everyone in the city that I met that I was a writer and I was kind of a big deal in Ireland. And basically that's what I needed to do to scare myself into having a go at it, and thankfully it was all right. It worked out quite well. Within 18 months I made a whole $3 off my first short story. I've made a wee tiny bit more than that since, but not much.
Well, you are a fiction writer, so to present yourself in that way was your first act of fiction writing, so that was great. Who else wants to jump in on that one?
I think I've always loved listening to stories, and I grew up in a family full of stories, and I've done so many different things in my life, you know, from starting startups to, you know, I've just done so much, and writing has always come back to be the one thing. And I've nearly died 2 times in my life, and both times the thing I wanted to do when I didn't die was right. And I'm not sure how you figure that out without nearly dying. But I would say, I mean, I just recently finished When Breath Becomes Air, and he's constantly saying, do I stay in neurosurgeon or do I write? Yeah. And, you know, I don't know what it's like to be so split, but I know that every time I had, like, a very scary place, writing was the thing I regretted not having done more of.
Yeah, I think
did you always know?
I always wanted to be a writer, but I think that being a writer has nothing to do with readership, with awards, not even with publication. For me, being a writer is, who knows whether it's genetic or psychological or spiritual or whatever it is, but it's some kind of quirk in your personality, in your makeup, that means that you understand the world best and you feel most active in the world if you remove yourself from it or abstract yourself from it and kind of distill it into words. Like, it's a kind of a weird thing, but it's like, if that's the thing that you need to do, you're not living your fullest life unless you're doing it. And you know, a writer is someone who writes. You know, Jan, we're kind of saying the same thing in different ways. That it's just about doing it and just about trusting it. And I think that it's just the doing it and doing it. And so often, you know, in any writing life, there are highs, there are such lows, there are such despairs. The only way to kind of deal with all of that is to bring yourself back to that thing that sometimes I feel that writing for me, the writing is a kind of byproduct of my interest in the world. You know, the best thing about writing, as Michelle said, it's the privilege of the intimacy that it gives you to people. You know, the stories that people offer, they might be stories that they might not have even told like a priest. You know, they confide these stories in you, they give you these stories. And when I think of writing, you know, I'm writing currently about young women becoming Carmelite nuns. I was at CERN last year, like, you know, 90 meters underground, talking with quantum physicists, particle physicists, but, you know, all of this, it's you get to the meeting of people and the hearing of stories, and otherwise you'd have there wouldn't be a sort of relationship that you could just go and hang out with a particle physicist or ask nuns questions, or, you know, so the writing, I always feel that it allows me to be in the world better. And so that's what it is for me. And so if you're a writer, it's like the rest, if you can do that bit, the rest will take care of itself.
That's great. Great question, thank you. And hopefully nobody needs to nearly die to find out that's their path. Any other questions? Hi, yes, I see you over there.
This is for Jen. You said earlier that you hate writing women, and I was curious if you could talk a little bit about that and why you prefer writing men.
I'm just going to repeat that, but give Jan a second to think about an answer. Jan said that she didn't like writing women, or that she hated writing women, and the question is why that is and why she prefers writing men.
I think it's because I am a woman, and when I start to write women, I feel like I have to get it right, because it's an experience that I inhabit every day, and to write men is much more interesting for me because I get to practice all of those things about, you know, what it is to be a writer. It's to make things up, it's to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I also think, if I'm being really honest, I don't have children, I don't have a partner. There's a lot of writing about women that I feel outside of. So sometimes that I feel like, am I getting this part right? So men come a lot easier. And finally I'll say I'm also a community arts worker. I have been doing community arts since '98, and a lot of my work has been with men. And I've been particularly interested in the things that men don't talk about in the Northern Irish context. I think women are great talkers. They find those spaces with other women, usually to offload. We have a lot of men who need to have a good cry, and they need to talk about terrible things they've seen and done. So giving a voice to some of those men has been both a great privilege and a kind of artistic challenge. And I hope to write more of them, and I also hope to get a wee bit more comfortable writing women. And
You've got gorgeous women in your new collection.
You really do.
yeah, but most of them are actually men. Like the mother in The Raptures is actually my father.
Oh, wow.
It's my father's personality inhabiting a mother's. There's a character called Jonathan in the Firestarters, and it's me. He's the closest I've ever written to myself. People just don't notice it because you've made him a man.
Yeah.
So that emotional core when you're writing characters is really important, and a lot of it transfers across the genders. So yeah, I don't have anything else to say about that.
It's an easy way to hide in your characters a little bit. I think in my first novel, the protagonist was a guy, and people didn't assume he was me because it was a guy, but there was so much of me in him. So yeah. We have time for, I think, one more question, and I saw that hand shoot up at the back. So yes, you get the question.
Yeah, I was wondering, you talked about writing like the quote, shitty first draft. How do you manage the difference between like not getting attached to your work, but not losing like the personal and like integrity aspect to your work?
Okay, I'll just repeat
Yes,
that.
sorry.
Just so the question is about how to manage the personal aspect and the integrity of your work without getting too attached to your work. Lucy,
Yeah,
we're jumping in
I
there.
have a brilliant answer to this.
Yes, let's hear it.
And I got it from Joan Didion. Sadly, not in person. I got it from her Paris Review interview, and she got it from Hemingway, so it has really good covenant.
We're handing along.
And that is that every new draft, I retype. I print, and I print it out, and I set it beside me, and I open up a fresh Word doc, and I retype it in. And partly that's to do with experiencing the story as a reader. You know, partly it's to do with streamlining. You know, you might have had a whole weekend when the house was empty and you just wrote. You might have kind of gone to your computer and managed to have a couple of sentences while there were children gouldering below. So it's a way of kind of streamlining the experience of entering your story as a reader. But also, crucially, what it does is the more you write your story, the better you know your characters. And so when you start writing, you might not know them very well at all, but several drafts in, they'll start to do and say different things. And what you want to do is you want to leave that kind of psychic space open up until the very last draft for things to be provisional, things to be live, things to go a different way. If you're trying to edit on screen, you've got everything looks official and it's like prizing bars apart to try to get something new in. If you're retyping it, your characters can come alive under your fingertips. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, go with it, fly to fantasy, delete it, go back to what you have here. So I think that's some of the best kind of edit, like on a more practical level, that's some of the best writing and editing advice that served me very well. So I'm thankful to Joan Didion for it most days.
Well, we're thankful to you for it tonight. That's really great. Does anyone else want to chip in on that question? Or?
No, but it just reminds me, there's some writer, isn't there, where she writes her first draft and then she burns it. And then and then she writes again. I don't believe her. I don't believe her. I think it's one of those things you say to get attention.
Another copy.
But just in case, you could just burn it and try again. You know.
Well, there's something sort of ritualistic about the burning of it. But
like a bit of fire.
Yeah, and I read somewhere in the very beginning when I was writing about leaving it for like 8 to 12 weeks, but you know, when you finish that first draft and not going straight in, and that's something that served me well, to try and get to the point of being a reader of my own work as opposed to being already buried in there as a writer. So,
can I say
yes, please, Jen.
Also, it might not be very good and you just have to throw it in the bin. And I'm not saying that to be facetious, but I write shadow novels, and I've only just acknowledged this in the last year. Every single book I've ever published, I wrote a whole novel, 100,000 words, and it was just there to distract me from the thing I was meant to be writing. And I wasted years trying to fix those shadow novels up when they just should have gone straight in the bin. So being aware of that little niggly thing that's at the back of your brain when you're doing the thing you're supposed to be doing, or that you've got Arts Council funding to do, or you're doing for your dissertation or whatever, it might just be distracting you so the back of your brain can go to the place that you're actually meant to be. Not a very productive way to write books, but the other big thing is everyone just writes the way they write. It's a bit like, you know, getting to 43 and realising that you're not going to fix the big character flaws you have in your life. You just have to work around them.
Shadow novels, I haven't heard that before. I love that. And another writing teacher told me about writing what scares you. When you feel really scared about the thing you're writing, that's kind of when you know you're onto something good, which I think ties into that a little bit. But anyway, we could chat up here all night, I feel, and I want to make sure that we have time for our light refreshments and meeting the writers in the lobby. So first of all, I want to say thanks to all of you for coming out. Let's give everybody a hand. Let's give the writers a hand for being here. A list of people I need to thank, so I'm going to go back to read from my list here. So special thanks to the Government of Ireland and the Northern Ireland Bureau, the Consul General of Ireland in New York, Villanova Center for Irish Studies, and the Anne Welsh McNulty Institute for Women's Leadership, as well as all of the other generous local Philadelphia and Villanova University partners. And as I said, before you disappear out into the night, there are refreshments, there are books to be bought and signed and read, and more questions to be asked and the conversation to be continued. So I hope you can join us out there, and thanks again for coming.
Thank you.